This is a presentation for the Winnipeg Philatelic Society, Western Canada's oldest stamp club, on General Leclerc, who was a French general in the Second World War. And one of the things that stamp collecting is supposed to do is inspire you to find out a little bit about history. And there are 7 French stamps that commemorate or honor General Leclerc. So I thought I'd find out a little bit about him and his history and the history of the stamps. Now, General Leclerc was born in 1902, and he was born Philippe François Marie de Holcoq, which, fabulous French name, an aristocratic name, and he was son of a military family dating back to 1270, so a long military history in their family. And Leclerc was a nom de guerre. He was given permission to add it to his name. So he is now Leclerc de Holcoq but that's his birth name there. He married Thérèse de Gargan, who was also an aristocrat, and they had 6 children. He served in the French army in Morocco in 1927 and was awarded the Legion of Honor. In 1936 he fell from a horse and broke his leg in 2 places, and thereafter he used a cane. Now the cane in the history of Leclerc also becomes iconic. We'll see it on a couple of the stamps. It's certainly seen in many of the pictures of Leclerc because he used the cane all the time. So in the beginning of the Second World War, the fall of France, which occurred on the 22nd of June 1940, Leclerc was involved. On the 28th of May, he was captured, but he argued his way out. He said, I was wounded in Morocco, and I have a broken leg, and I have to walk with a cane, so I'm not eligible for military service. The first time he tried that, they found a French army pay stub in his pocket. So he was sent on to another place where by the time he got there, he had destroyed the pay stub, and he successfully argued his way out. He got through the lines, got permission to rejoin his family, but he'd found they'd fled to Savoie de la Grande. And on June the 15th, he was again wounded in action. He was in hospital and taken prisoner in hospital, but he got away by jumping out a window. And the deal in the armistice on the 22nd of June was that any French soldiers who had not been captured were allowed to go home. Almost 2 million French soldiers were kept as prisoners of war throughout the Second World War. So this was the first time he used the name Leclerc. As he's moving through France to visit his family, he uses the name Leclerc, which literally means the clerk. So that's kind of clever. It's kind of a humble name. Doesn't sound at all aristocratic. Anyway, he gets to visit his family and then to Spain, to Lisbon, and to London, where he joins the Free French forces. He's then involved in Cameroon and Gabon, where they are retaking French colonies, making them part of the Free French. His big battle was at Kufra, and this is where he began to use his nom de guerre Leclerc, because he wished to protect his family, figuring that if he goes by his real name, his family will be persecuted in France. So under Leclerc, the French win the Battle of Kufra, which is spelled differently in French, in North Africa in 1941. And this is very significant because it is the first French success since the fall of France in 1940. And Kufra is on the way to Tripoli and Tobruk. So it was a significant military victory. The other thing that he does in Kufra is he has his men swear the oath of Kufra in 1941. And there's an English translation there, but I think it sounds much better in French. And this guy really had a turn of phrase because it's a rather inspirational oath. I think if I had been writing it, I would have said, I swear to stay in the army until we capture France. But this is much more eloquent. Jure de ne déposer les armes. I swear not to lay down arms, not to stay in the army, but I won't lay down arms. Que le jour nos couleurs, until the day our colors, which I think is also very elegantly written. And then he repeats it, nos belles couleurs, our beautiful colors, flotteront sur la cathédrale de Strasbourg, not fly above or are hoisted above, but float above the Cathedral of Strasbourg. So a very significant oath. And also, think about this. This is 1941. France has fallen in 1940. The Battle of the Atlantic is raging. North Africa has been taken. Kufra is the end of the battle for North Africa. So we can now move across to Italy, but that hasn't been done yet, and that was a horrible amount of fighting. Normandy is still to be taken. That hasn't even been contemplated. And here Leclerc is saying to his men, I want you to stay fighting with me until we take Strasbourg. Strasbourg, by the way, also very symbolic. It's on the Rhine, on the border between France and Germany. And it's in Alsace-Lorraine, which was lost by France to Prussia in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, and then regained at the end of the First World War. So having the French flag fly above the Strasbourg Cathedral, tremendously symbolic, and it means that France has been liberated. So he's a real optimist that he is going to liberate Strasbourg. Anyways, Leclerc is involved in the Normandy invasion, and that's an interesting history too. This raises all kinds of questions of things that I'm not discussing that Leclerc was involved in. That was tremendously interesting and historical. But what had happened at this phase of the war, it's now the dash to Berlin. The Russians are dashing westward to Berlin, and the Allies are dashing eastward to Berlin because they know exactly what's going to happen when the Russians get to Berlin. So Eisenhower was planning to go around Paris. Far too expensive in men, material, time to take Paris. It would probably result in a lot of damage to the city. So he was just going to go around Paris and not take Paris, just keep going. On August the 19th, though, the Parisians rose against the Germans. The resistance rose, and it started to be rather a serious battle, and rather a lot of people started to get killed because, of course, the resistance had not much in the way of armor and ammunition and weapons, and the Germans had tanks. Now, von Kollitz, who was the German regular army general in charge of Paris, was under orders from Hitler to destroy Paris. And there's a really interesting book you can read called Is Paris Burning, which describes what happened. But he was inclined to surrender. It was, I think, apparent to a lot of regular army that it was pretty much over. The Russians were coming. The Allies were coming. The war was over. So he was quite prepared to surrender. Now, de Gaulle got involved because he wanted to stop the fighting because rather a lot of people were being killed. And he finally persuaded Eisenhower to let Leclerc enter Paris, which he did on the 24th of August with 97 killed and 238 wounded, which for a city the size of Paris and the battle it could have been was rather a small cost, though anyone killed is too much of a cost. And the Germans surrendered the day later, on the 25th of August, 1944. So for the French, this was a huge victory. Liberating Paris, having a French battalion liberate Paris was hugely symbolic to the French. So here we have a stamp issued in 1969, the 25th anniversary of the liberation of Paris. And there we have Leclerc and a tank and Les Invalides in the background, which is one of 5 or 10 highly iconic French buildings in Paris. Now, the 2e DB is the second armored division, the Division Blindée. This means armored division. And the Invalides were originally a French military hospital and home for veterans. So a very appropriate icon to have on the stamp. Then we move on to Strasbourg, which, as I said, that's the farthest eastern border of France. So Leclerc gets permission to launch a surprise attack on Strasbourg. The Germans now are using 15 and 16 and 17-year-old boys who've been pressed into service, and they are told to fight to their last round of ammunition, which many accomplish by throwing away all but one round, firing it off and surrendering. So Leclerc is assigned the capture on November the 22nd, and once again, day later, 23rd of November, the tricolor flew over the cathedral. So again, hugely symbolic and represented the liberation of France. And de Gaulle had insisted that French forces take Strasbourg. So here we have the stamp, and that is the Strasbourg Cathedral, the 2e DB, and General Leclerc. And someone has had the kindness to have this stamp cancelled in Strasbourg on the 24th of August, 1969, the day after the 25th anniversary. Now, sadly, Leclerc dies in a plane crash on military service in North Africa, and so this stamp commemorates his death. It notes Kufra and Strasbourg, and we have the tank and the palm tree for Kufra, and the tank approaching the Strasbourg Cathedral, and we have Leclerc, and we see his cane. His cane's down there on the bottom left by the word postes. So he is made Marshal of France, which is a posthumous promotion and great honor, in August of 1952, and 2 stamps were issued, both noting Kufra and Strasbourg. So here is the first 8 francs. Same design as before, except it's General Leclerc, Maréchal de France, down at the bottom, noting Kufra and Strasbourg. And then in 54, price of postage has gone up, so now it's a 12 franc stamp, but exactly the same design and noting Kufra and Strasbourg. On the 30th anniversary of his death in 1987, this stamp was issued, and we now combine all 3. We have the palm trees of Kufra, Les Invalides from Paris, and the Strasbourg Cathedral, and General Leclerc, Maréchal de France. The final stamp honoring Leclerc was issued in 1997 on his 50th anniversary. This is the badge, effectively kind of a stylized badge of his division. Anyway, Leclerc also appeared on stamps of Algeria and Morocco, and there's much more to his story than I've touched on here. He was at the surrender of Japan, and was one of France's greatest fighting generals. So, thanks for listening.